Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for another video today. If you haven't been here before, my name's Peter, this is Thailand Bound, and I'm reading out 3 viewer stories that have been sent in to me. Okay, so today's video is probably going to be a little bit longer than normal because the second story out of the 3 is probably one of the longest stories I've ever read out, but it's a good story, so I thought I'd include it in today's upload. Before I get started, somebody wrote to me yesterday and said, "Hey Pete, how's the weather in Thailand? Is it still warm or is it getting a little bit cooler?" The answer is no, it's very, very hot. Extremely hot, running between 38 and 40 degrees, even slightly higher. And if you come in here, you can't do anything about the weather, but just be warned, it is extremely hot and very uncomfortable in the afternoons. Okay, right, let's get into the first of 3 stories today.
สวัสดีค่ะ
Looking back, the events that led me to a very long relationship with Thailand and Thai people seems like a tale narrated by a devious author full of intrigue, twists and turns. My first Thai acquaintance was a man called Tim. As with all revolving doors along one's destiny, fate played a big hand in bringing us together. The year was 1986 and I had recently returned from a 1-year break in Europe. I was going through a phase of self-discovery and Buddhism and had piqued my curiosity. As chance would have it, I lived very close to a Thai Buddhist monastery in Sydney. I therefore made it a priority to speak with the monks at the Wat. It was in this incense-scented temple that I became acquainted with a middle-aged Australian man who had previously been a monk in Thailand. His name was Alan and he generously offered to give me private lessons at his apartment, conveniently located very close to my house. Alan's living space was a neat 2-bedroom apartment with some interesting ornaments. I noted that he shared his residence with a subcontinental man whom I caught a fleeting glimpse of on a couple of occasions. I asked Alan who the man was and he said it was just someone he had sublet a room to. Disappointingly, Alan, as it turned out, was more interested in carnal pursuits than in teaching me about enlightenment. As a male relationship was not what I was seeking, the visits to his house came to a quick and an abrupt end. At this time, I was also learning German at a college in the evenings. During a recess from one of these lessons, I made my way to a nearby balcony for a smoke. As I walked out, I noticed 4 or 5 people were puffing away on a dimly lit campus balcony. I started to chat with the smokers, as is customary in these situations. Suddenly, a dark, complex man stepped towards me and said he had seen me somewhere but couldn't place me. I looked at him intensely and as if a light had just been switched on, I remembered he was the man I'd briefly caught a glimpse of during the Buddhist lessons with Alan. He introduced himself as Tim from Thailand and told me he was attending English classes at the college. In a city of 3 million people, something had brought us together on that fateful summer's evening. As with most Thais, he had a heart-melting smile and a very nice personality. We instantly bonded and became good friends. Through Tim, I was introduced to the Thai incoming community that had only recently started to flood into Sydney. Most of them in those days were cleaners on overstayed visas. Although I had not given up on my quest on Buddhist teachings, the Thai community presented me with another point of interest which I found refreshingly new and seductively exotic. My acquaintances within this community grew very quickly, and through Tim I was introduced to a Thai couple, Lop and Prani. These 2 people would become central characters in my life over the years, particularly Lop, whose niece I married years later. More on that on another time. For now, Prani played a bigger role. She was a very sweet and talkative lady with whom I had endless discussions on every topic imaginable. Whilst Tim had an Indian background, Prani's parents were both from China. Tim and Prani and myself made a short trip to Koh Samet in 1986. I was 22 years old and fueled by restless curiosity and equally matched by reckless naivety. When Prani invited me to travel with her to Thailand, I immediately accepted. I remember the first sight I caught of Thailand through the window of the descending aircraft, a land crisscrossed with shimmering water canals. Stepping out of Don Mueang Airport, the intense heat and humidity hit me like a punch to the ribs, leaving me breathless. Prani, having arrived a few days prior, awaited me at the terminal alongside her brother. Together, they whisked me away from the airport to their residence in a Bangkok suburb. A few days later, Tim also arrived and I was very happy to see him. Tim introduced me to Patpong, where I suppose he thought I'd be amazed by the shows. I found the experience awkward. There was nothing exotic about any of the shows. It was more like being at the circus of bizarre curiosities and evoked the same feelings one might have in seeing a man with two heads or the lady with a snake's body. I remember a topless girl came to our table asking my friends who I was. She smiled sweetly at me. My first impressions of the country were not favourable. Bangkok seemed grotty, bustling, noisy and pungent. I was not a seasoned traveller and was almost entirely dependent on my host to show me around. I was a limp passenger that would eventually annoy my hosts. Worse still, I hated Thai food and I couldn't put anything in my mouth without gagging. I was therefore forced to walk to a McDonald's store about 2 kilometres away each day and eat there. It's with embarrassment that I now recall what a difficult guest I was. Prani's brother, Liang, was the bass player for a band which had achieved moderate fame, especially through their flamboyant transgender singer mother. Despite disbanding long ago, Mum, who has now completely transitioned into a ladyboy, remains a popular entertainer in Thailand. The band had a regular gig at the Asia Hotel near Siam Square, performing nearly every night from midnight to 3 a.m. Occasionally, I would head down to the hotel, enjoying a few drinks and catch their show. After an uneventful and rather dull 2 weeks of sightseeing, Liang announced that I should get an early night as after tomorrow's gig, he was taking me somewhere special. As he had promised, the next evening, Liang, along with a friend and Prani, took us on a 2-hour drive outside Bangkok to a place called Pattaya. I had no idea about this place except that it was a seaside resort with many foreigners and a lot of Western food. I remember we arrived at 6 a.m. in the morning just as the sun was rising and we were looking for a noodle shop for a quick early morning meal before resting at the hotel. We found a diner and each ordered a soup from the menu. I was eagerly anticipating a swim at the beach, a bit of sun and some Western food. Since my arrival to Thailand, I had completely lost my appetite and was eating very little. I was therefore eager to get some food into me. When the bowls of noodles came out, I noticed that Liang's soup contained some dark floating cubes. I asked what they were and he answered that it was pig's blood jelly. He picked one up with his chopsticks, brought it to his mouth and gobbled it up. On seeing this, my stomach churned. I stood up and I quickly ran out of the restaurant as I was very close to losing the little I had in my stomach. That evening, Liang and his friend took me out to a typical Pattaya girly bar. It was called the Goodwill Bar in central Pattaya. Having ordered a round of beers, they started chatting to some of the girls behind the bar, and shortly a girl sat opposite me. She was a small and cute girl with honey-coloured skin, but spoke next to no English. After a couple of drinks, before I knew what was happening, the girl who called herself Lek had come out of the bar and sat next to me holding my arm. Liang told me she wanted me to take her back to our hotel room. I was confused. Why would she want to come to the hotel, I asked. They both gave me a lurid grin and prodded me along. As Lek and I strolled arm in arm towards the hotel, she suddenly announced in English, "I love you." I was quite shocked at this as I had known her for barely a couple of hours. It may have seemed like a tacky line used by a lady of the night, but as I reflect back on it now, it hit the mark it intended. Lek, like a professional predator, had shrewdly assessed my nature and had sunk her claws deep into me. At the hotel, we did nothing but cuddle. As the room was being shared by my friends, it didn't seem appropriate in indulging in anything more than cuddling. Later, we went downstairs to join my friends, who all had a silly smirk on their face. This was my first brutal introduction to Thai women. Needless to say, with my level of experience, I quickly became infatuated with Lek and stayed in Pattaya after bidding farewell to my friends. I spent one more day with Lek before returning to Bangkok, but I promised Lek I would be back shortly. A few days later, I caught a bus from Edgemere and returned to Pattaya. Lek was very happy to see me. We had a great few days together. She didn't think much, but I did. One early incident that caught me off guard was one evening as we made our way back to the hotel, Lek complained that she needed to use the bathroom. Suddenly, she jumped into the shadows of some shrubs off Beach Road, squatted and did it right there. A real village girl, I thought. Soon after, Lek asked me if I would travel with her to her home village. I eagerly said yes. I told Prani about my plan, but she wasn't pleased. She argued that if I found the food in Bangkok difficult, how would I cope in rural Thailand? Prani's concern was partly based on a promise she made to my mother to keep me safe. Despite Prani's well-meaningness, I travelled to Lek's home village. The overnight ride from Bangkok by coach was long and uncomfortable. We arrived in Nakhon Phanom, the city of mountains, at dawn. The place was almost devoid of tourists. The foreigners could be counted on one hand and were invariably much older. Because of this, I immediately drew a lot of attention from the locals. I was surprised but also amused by their long, incessant stares. People were looking at me though I was some well-known person. Lek told me that we'd have to travel another half an hour from the town to reach her village. She took me by the hand and led me to a nearby tuk-tuk, negotiated a very small price of around 20 baht, and off we went. Lek's village consisted of around 20 houses, the majority of which were built of wood and some stood on cement pylons, the others on wooden slats. Children and chickens ran around everywhere and buffalo ruminated underneath the raised houses. What made the trip even more memorable and intriguing was it was a time of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain, which was still down, shut between Thailand and its communist neighbour Laos. There were no friendship bridges in those days. The country was so temptingly close that you could easily swim across, yet at once the land across the river was remote and untouchable. At some points of the river, particularly in the area of Lek's village, the opposite bank was narrow enough to hear the children's playful voices. Lek would sometimes teasingly shout out to them and wait for a reply. None came, but the playful giggling continued. On the first day in the village, a wedding was taking place and the Isan music was blaring on full volume all night long. The next morning the party was still in full swing, with many of the revellers were still going hard. Curiosity got the better of me. I crossed the road to see what was happening. A few of them caught sight of me and enthusiastically invited me to join them. As I walked to the back of the house where most of the people were sitting, there was a severed head of a recently slaughtered buffalo on the banquet table. It was a macabre scene, the open eyes of the head looking into space with a halo of flies buzzing around it. The revellers had been drinking all night and were by now very drunk and loud. The lively beats of Isan music, the dancing and the merriment was all new and strange to me, but interesting and captivating. However, communication with the guests was next to impossible. I was barraged by 1,000 questions by multiple people speaking all at once, but had no idea what they were saying. I nodded shyly and smiled. They gave me some whiskey to drink. Lek soon arrived looking for me and appeared a bit annoyed by the situation. She took me by the arm and pulled me away, taking me back to her house and saying that it was too dangerous for me to be there. Another revelation was the perfect English which Lek's uncle spoke. It was not easy to find good English speakers in Bangkok, so finding one here in the middle of nowhere was surprising. I asked him where he had learned English. From the Americans, he said. I would later learn that Nakhon Phanom served as an Air Force base where the Thai military hosted the 56th Air Commando Wing during the Vietnam War. Lek's uncle had worked on the base. I spent about a week in the village and did some unimaginable things. Later, we were visiting a relative who had a large colour TV where American football was being televised. I was being asked the rules of the game, which, coming from Australia, I had very little knowledge of. I think what I described to them was more akin to rugby league than to American football. All of a sudden I felt an earthquake. The walls started to bounce up and down and I could hardly stand. Somehow I managed to stumble out of the house with Lek close to my heels. My heart was racing and I was about to go into a panic attack. She managed to calm me down and took me to an upstairs bedroom where I could lie down. Thankfully, the minute I lay down, the chaos and violence of my head disappeared. For the next 8 hours, I dared not stand up. A few days later, I managed to persuade Lek to help me cross into Laos using a canoe. I don't know why she agreed, but she arranged with some locals from another village to dress me up in Thai clothes and ferry me across to Laos. On the other side of the bank, I was spotted by a Laos man and his young son sitting in the grass fields. Under the shade of a makeshift shelter made out of sticks and dried grass, he was friendly but eyed me with suspicion. The small boy looked almost terrified at the sight of me. It was as if he had seen a ghost. I was fortunate to come back without being arrested, especially given the circumstances of the times. Interestingly, the boy was not the only local unsettled in my presence. There were a number of children in the village that were mortified every time I looked their way. Being a bit mischievous myself, I gleefully pranked them at every opportunity. I would pretend I was a bogeyman, raising my arms over my head and chasing them. They would scatter in every direction, running in panic for their lives. On one occasion, I caught one of the young boys and he went into hysterics, shouting and crying. It was hilarious to see, but I got a few unapproving looks from the parents. Luckily for me, I was considered a child myself. On the way back from Nakhon Phanom, we took a detour through the countryside of Isan. One of the memorable cities we visited was Ubon Ratchathani. The tranquil ambience of the town and the beautiful temples left me with a blissful inner peace. Lek was an early riser, and on the second morning in town, I woke up and she wasn't in the room. She returned after a couple of hours. I asked her where she had been, and she said that she went downstairs for breakfast. The next day, Lek was gone again. I had been reading a Lonely Planets book that I had brought along with me and discovered that I was very close to the Buddhist temple where many Westerners entered the monkhood. This rekindled my interest to learn more about Buddhism. I therefore took the opportunity whilst Lek was away to visit the Wat. It was the first time I had ventured out alone in Thailand without a chaperone. By this stage, I had started picking up the Thai language quickly. Something had just clicked in my brain and I was learning Thai at an incredible speed. By the time we got back to Bangkok after 2 weeks in Isan, I had picked up a vocabulary of 200 words and phrases, which was surprising even to me. Many people were starting to ask me how many years I'd spent in the country, and when I'd answered 5 weeks, they'd laugh and call me a liar. I remember clumsily asking people the way to the temple. Some of the girls I stopped simply giggled and covered their eyes with their hands. They were very shy creatures, and a foreigner striking up a conversation with a young girl on the streets was considered a bit strange. Eventually, I found a tuk-tuk that was heading to the Wat. I negotiated a price and hopped on. The drive was not short. It took close to 20 minutes to reach the Wat, which was located in a wooden area. On the outer grounds of the Wat, I met an Israeli couple who were visiting for the same reasons as myself, and together we made our way to the Wat to meet the abbot. The abbot was a young Westerner in a saffron tunic, cleanly shaven with pale skin and blue eyes. His voice was very soft and gentle. My new friends and I sat on the ground together, and the abbot facing us answered our questions. The Israelis knew a lot more about Buddhism and were asking some very probing questions. As our discussion grew more focused, all of a sudden I hear a disruptive loud voice calling out my name from the far end of the hall. I looked around, and to my shock and horror it was Lek, rushing in with a big smile. To this day, I don't know how she found me, but she had hired a tuk-tuk to look for me. She told me she had searched a number of places before coming to the Wat. Listening intently to the abbot's wise words, I was not happy to see her. My quest had been dashed once again, this time by my own carnal misdeeds. Following this interruption, I stood up and excused myself from the abbot. Feeling despondent, I returned to Ubon Ratchathani with Lek in the tuk-tuk. During this ride, I could not conceal my disappointment and sensed that Lek had read my mind. There was an awkward discomfort between us that I hadn't felt before. The next morning, Lek was gone. This time I thought she'll be back in a couple of hours. By midday, Lek still hadn't returned, so I went out to do some sightseeing on my own. After several hours, I returned, but Lek was nowhere to be seen. As the hours passed, I became a bit concerned and went looking for her, but couldn't find her. I was really getting a bit worried when she hadn't returned by nightfall. I waited and expected her to enter the room at any moment. To my great anguish, she didn't come back at all that night. Eventually, in the early morning hours, I drifted off to sleep, but woke up the next day to find that she was still missing. It was a day we had scheduled to travel back to Bangkok, so I wasn't sure what to do. At around 9 a.m, Lex stormed into the room, huffing and puffing. Relieved but angry, I asked her where she had been. She gave me a tall story that she had witnessed an accident with a small child and had assisted the child, taking him to the hospital and sitting by his bedside all night long. She showed me a couple of small blood stains on her shirt as proof. She was now rushing me to quickly pack and head to the bus station. I never did find out what she really got up to that night, but after all the stories I've heard over the years, I wouldn't be surprised if she had met someone and made a bit of money on the side that night. Given her eagerness to leave the hotel, it was probably in the very same hotel where we were staying. By this time, I was developing strong feelings for Lek and falling in love with Thailand. This was the honeymoon stage of my relationship with Thailand. A long time had passed since my relationship with Lek. Luckily, I was young and poor in those days, and the only thing that Lek managed to break was my heart. If anything, I think she wasted a lot of time on me for little reward. Nevertheless, for me, it was a valuable time, and I took away much wisdom from the experience. Lek's final lesson was the best and most brutal. It was a lesson of the heart and mind that I would never forget, and it left an incredible impression. We were together in Pattaya during my final week of this incredible trip. Lek told me she was leaving a few days before as she had some business to attend in Bangkok. I told her not to go. I demanded she not go. She said, "If you want to go, you come with me." I said, "I don't want to go to Bangkok just yet," whereupon she turned away and left. To this day, I can see her disappearing figure as she walked away, and in the distance, her figure ducking around a corner as I watched her walking away, expecting her to turn her head and give me one final wave or sign of affection, a smile, a look of dejected resignation, a kiss blown in the wind, anything for those magic moments we had spent together. She didn't. She walked as though she was just popping off to the corner shop, whilst I stood frozen on the spot watching her fade out of my life. It's amazing. As I write these words, I can still picture that moment, although it was yesterday. This happened over 40 years ago. I never saw Lek again since that moment. I've tried to emulate that same goodbye, never quite achieving such perfection. She was the master and I a mere pupil. After returning to Australia, I kept in touch with Lek through translated letters. Telephone calls were expensive, so communication wasn't easy. I put Prani, who was still in Thailand, through one last indecency, making her go to the bars of Pattaya to deliver a message to Lek. She didn't find her, but she met her sister. That was probably a cousin, as Lek called everyone her sister. Prani had interesting discussions with the sister, who confided in her that Lek had many suitors and mercifully advised me through Prani that I should forget her, as she was now seen a German man. So I've obviously got my stories mixed up. I said the middle one was a very long one. It was actually that one I've just read. Looking at the clock, it was 28 minutes long. So I better crack on, get straight into the second story. The third one is extremely short. Thank heavens I've just tagged that one on the end. So let's get straight into story number 2. It was 1990 and I had planned to do my first trip to Thailand with my best friend John. We were supposed to go to the year before, but John broke his leg in a car accident. He was always having accidents in his car, and I remembered a couple of times he rode a motorbike. He also had accidents. He was just a really bad driver. But that time he broke his leg while somebody else was driving. It was coming close to the date we agreed to buy tickets, but I was between jobs and hadn't saved enough money, so I bailed and told him I would go with him on the next year instead. He was only there for 2 weeks, but at the end of his first trip, after a night out of having fun and getting drunk, he crashed his scooter into a truck and died instantly. We grew up together and I was devastated. At his funeral back in Australia, I met a Filipino girl, Maria, that John went to church with. He used to mention her quite a bit, but I hadn't met her as I never used to like going to church. I was always forced to go when I was a kid. Mum also made me go to be an altar boy for 3 years in primary school. John always used to say how beautiful and bubbly Maria was. Maria and I became close friends and eventually became boyfriend-girlfriend. We had a good relationship for nearly 4 years, but she didn't like me going out with my friends and getting drunk and smoking funny stuff. The arguments became more frequent and I was over it. One day, I went to a massage parlour in Melbourne for a bit of aerobics with a beautiful Thai girl. Marie was the first Asian girl I had been with, but over time she had gained quite a bit of weight and the constant fighting had really turned me off. So when I met this beautiful Thai girl, I was instantly hooked and asked her for a number, and I called her the next day to ask if she'd like to go out for dinner sometime, to which she agreed. When I picked her up, to my surprise, her best friend was with her. Anne said, "I hope you don't mind if my friend comes with us." I laughed and said no problem. Her friend was even more beautiful than her, and they even jokingly asked if I wanted to choose which one I wanted to take home that night. Anne and I ended up together, and after about a year we went to Thailand and I met her family. She took me to Pat Pong and I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. Fast forward almost 30 years, we've had 2 beautiful daughters and ready to retire in Thailand. It's funny how fate can lead you to different outcomes. My best friend led me to being addicted to Asian girls, which eventually led me to meeting my wife and finally living in Thailand. I guess some things are meant to be. Yeah, it's quite strange there, isn't it? His best friend dies and he ends up marrying the guy's girlfriend. I don't think he would have minded if he was looking down on him from up there. Quite a nice little story. I'm going to crack straight on with the third one. This is a very, very short story, but it's a good lesson, and this is something that goes on quite often here. It's called the friendly scammer. Before arriving in Bangkok last November for a week's stay, I went to Thai Friendly to line up some short-time dates. I was staying in a great hotel near Nana Station on Soi 7/1. There was one middle-aged lady who had messaged me frequently. She claimed to be a successful business owner with her own house in the city. She came to my hotel early in the evening and I met her in the hotel patio area. She was the same lady in the Thai-friendly pictures, short, middle-aged, average-looking, with a medium-slim body. I would rate her a 6.5 out of 10. After greetings, she grabbed my arm saying she was hungry and wanted to eat. I said there's a few places here on Soi 7/1 we could try. She said it was her birthday, red flag, and wanted to go to her favourite place. We walked to Sukhumvit for a cab. There was a lot of traffic and it was slow going. She sat close, very touchy, very feely. We made some small talk. She said her friend met a guy on Thai Friendly and that they later married. The restaurant was 10 kilometres away and it took a while to get there. When we arrived, she told me to pay the cabbie 200 baht for the ride. The restaurant was a large open-air establishment with a big kitchen. We sat down and a stern-looking woman came and took our order, which was a bottle of red wine and a type of barbecue for 2. The food was good and my date cooking the meat and vegetables over the cooking gizmo that was provided. The red wine wasn't that good, but I drank heartedly, wanting a buzz. She showed me pictures of her fancy homes and cars. She said, however, that if we were to spend the night together, it would be at my hotel room. I began to think about what this meal was going to cost. I estimated 500 baht for the wine and maybe 300 to 400 baht each for the meal. So maybe 1100 baht, 1,300 baht total plus a tip. So the server brought the check. It was around 6,000 baht. I said something like, wow, big bucks, but my date explained calmly that wine is expensive in Thailand. It wasn't a typical restaurant bill, rather just a baht amount written on a piece of paper. I said I didn't have enough cash and would have to make a withdrawal. She just happened to know where an ATM was and we walked over there together. I made my withdrawal, then we returned to the restaurant. Once we seated, I asked for an itemised bill. She became indignant, saying that I couldn't expect her to ask for such a thing and that she'd just have to pay the difference. I held fast, demanding to see an itemised bill. She then got up and walked off. After about 10 minutes, I realised she had left the restaurant and likely wasn't coming back. I headed over to the kitchen area and on the way, the stern-faced server intercepted me, saying there wasn't an itemised bill available. However, I asked a fellow in the kitchen for a bill and he waved me over to a cage where I was handed the itemised bill. It was for 2,194 baht, including the wine, 1,400 baht. I paid it and then had to figure out how to get back to the hotel. I had no idea where I was. I got on the Bolt app and within 30 seconds a motorbike taxi arrived. That was an unexpected thrill, zooming in and out of Bangkok traffic in 10 to 15 minutes. Someone asked where I'd gone. Oh, I said, I was just taken for a ride. I'm guessing the scam was that the server lady was her accomplice who would place the order and pick up the order at the kitchen, then deliver it to our table with a marked up bill. they would make a tidy profit of around 3,800 baht or $100 plus a free meal. I'm assuming she would have charged me for coming back to the hotel room as well, and I wonder how that would have turned out. So, guys, that is something that's very, very common here. A lot of guys get caught out like this. There's a couple of ways that girls do this kind of restaurant scam. One is that you'll take a girl for a date, she'll sit down and order, but instead of ordering a couple of dishes, if you go out with a genuine Thai girl, she'll order 1 or 2 dishes and a drink, that's it. And you go out with one of these types of girls, what happens is they'll fill the table with food. They'll just order so many dishes, and the guy's sitting there looking at all this food, you know, as many as maybe 8, 10 dishes, and she picks a little bit on each dish, and then she doesn't want it anymore. And the guy's left sitting looking at all this food, thinking to himself, why the hell did you order all this food? I have to pay for it. But of course, being gentlemen, they normally don't mention it. The reason they do it is they have it all packed up, they take it away with them, and they give it to their roommates. So the roommates are probably finished in the bar, they've got to eat, and she's got all this food, and it's really good quality food, isn't it? Because she's got it from a nice restaurant. The other way, I say recently, about 6 months ago, I met a guy at the end of my street who recognized me, and he was telling me about a scam he went through, which was kind of similar but different. It wasn't exact as the one I've just told you about. What happened to him, I won't name the bars in question, but you can probably guess. He was drinking in a bar where the girls don't normally come out of the bar and go with customers. And this particular guy got a real kind of challenge. He was talking to this girl he went in there every day of his vacation, and he gave himself a challenge. He thought, I'm going to get her out of here and get her on a date, and it was going well. In the end, she agreed to have dinner with him after a shift. She'd been working in the day, finished about 7, and she'd agreed she'd meet him and they'd have dinner together. So when they sat down, they were looking at the menu. The guy got up and he goes to the toilet, and he was in there for a while, came back. When the food came, she'd ordered. She said, don't worry about it, I've ordered for you. When the food come, she'd ordered lobsters, bottles of wine. I mean, so much high-quality food. Hardly touched it. She said, I've got to go now, and the bill was 11,000 baht. So obviously he'd been stung. So probably the arrangement was with the restaurant where, you know, they probably said, you know, you get a guy to spend over 5,000, 10,000 baht, we'll cut you in. And it's quite a lot of money for them, isn't it? So be really, really careful. If you go out for dinner with a girl for the first time, play it by ear. And what I would strongly advise, if you sit down and she orders all these dishes and she's taking you for an absolute fool, turn the coin on the other side, tell her you're going to the toilet and leave. And she's ordered the food, so let her pay for it. Okay? Sounds cruel, but she was going to do it to you. Guys, that's it for this week. It's a very, very long upload. I've got to wrap it up now. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you with some more stories next week.